Chico and the Man will not be presented this evening, and the Rockford Files will be seen 1 hour later than normal, so that we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by AlexRossArt.com. Alex has a brand new graphic novel coming out from Marvel and Abrams Books, Fantastic Four Full Circle. It comes out September 6th. It's a rainy night in Manhattan, and not a creature is stirring except for the Thing, Ben Grimm. When an intruder suddenly appears inside the Baxter Building, the Fantastic Four find themselves surrounded by a swarm of invading parasites. These carrion creatures, composed of negative energy, come to Earth using a human host as a delivery system. But for what purpose? And who is behind this untimely invasion? The Fantastic Four have no choice but to journey to the Negative Zone, an alien universe comprised entirely of antimatter, risking not just their own lives, but the fate of the cosmos. Fantastic Four Full Circle is the first long-form work written and illustrated by acclaimed artist Alex Ross, who revisits a classic Lee Kirby story from the 60s and introduces the storyline for a new generation of readers. Bold, vivid colors, his trademark visual storytelling, Ross takes Marvel's first team of superheroes to places only he can illustrate. The book also features a special poster jacket with the front flap unfolding to reveal an all-new, fully painted origin story of the Fantastic Four. Again, Fantastic Four Full Circle, out September 6th. For more details, go to AlexRossArt.com. All right, the hell with it. I was trying to show my intro, but I guess it's not working right now. I'm on my backup computer. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I don't have to worry about technical difficulties with Paul Kupperberg. He's live, so we've already tested everything, and it's working. So, Paul, good to see you. Welcome back.
Good to be here, and the doctors agree with you. I am live, so still.
Well, I'm glad you're live. You have been nothing but prolific the last few years with fiction and nonfiction coming from Crazy 8 Press and a lot of self-publishing initiatives, and really excited to talk to you today about your brand new book. And I'm going to get the cover here. Here it is. Direct Conversations. And this is great, man. This is a collection of interviews that you've done with buddies of yours from the Bronze Age. Come on, get up there, Image. Let's go here. Driving me nuts, man. All right, maybe my images aren't working today, Paul. I apologize.
Well, plug them in later.
Yeah, there you go. We'll put it in post. But this is great. You're in the midst of a Kickstarter campaign for this.
Yes,
tell us about the book.
Well, it's Direct Conversations. Talks with fellow DC Comics Bronze Age creators, I just sat down and talked with a bunch of guys about the good old days when we were breaking into comics in the early and mid 70s. So there's there's Howard Chaykin and Steve Mitchell and Paul Levitz, Tony Tollin, Michael Uslan, Bob Toomey, Bob Rozakis, Tony Isabella, Joe Staten, there you go. They're all there on the cover. It was just I started in May, and over the summer I talked to these guys over Zoom, and I knew I was working towards a project and all that, but how often do I have an opportunity to sit down and just talk for an hour or so with old friends and reminisce about the good old days and the good old and some not so good old days of comics when we were first breaking in. It was kind of, I learned a few things, but it was just fun talking about the old days and rehashing some of the stories and I may have heard them before. People were constantly saying, oh, I've told you the story before, but I was going, no, yeah, but it's not for me. It's for the readers. They're going to want to hear this stuff. So a lot of that going on.
Well, and it sounds like you'll forgive my comparison to what I do, but that you come with a plan, and then when the conversation happens, the conversation goes into directions you weren't expecting. And to me, that is the best thing about what I do. And I would imagine you had the same kind of, excitement doing it.
Well, the first few that I sat down with, I made notes and I researched and I was, I had a list of questions. And, after the first question, it's like, the best laid plans, they go. I have no control over what the answer is going to be and where that's going to take us. And so, within moments, it's like, just toss the plans out the window and just have a chat, just have a conversation. So, after the first few, I just like, I like, I would read everybody's wiki page and run through a few things, find some interviews and just kind of, but I wasn't making notes. I was just kind of like, all right, let's just go.
That's great, man. And again, that's what you want. You want a spontaneous conversation. Did you look back at when Will Eisner did his shop talk interviews?
Big influence. I have it right here on the shelf and referred to it numerous times, kind of in just kind of for tone and attitude and So I really love that book. And it wasn't exactly the inspiration, but it was a model I used going forward once I decided to do this. And it was just time. As I wrote somewhere on some blog post or something, it's like, I really ought to do this someday. And then I realized I'm 67. I'm collecting Social Security. If not now, when? So, I just sat down and did it.
Well, I'm glad you did, honestly, Paul. This is something that I've discussed before with a lot of my guests. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Brad Meltzer and I were talking about this. We need to get the record straight from the people who lived it. Yeah. Because I see a lot of, and you'll forgive me, I say this with a bit of a critical eye and ear. The geek culture sometimes, when they try to report on what happened, they get it wrong because they don't talk to the people who were there. And they make suppositions, and it's like, you're not telling the full story, and shame on you because these people are there to ask what happened exactly, and not with any agenda or negative thing, but just let's get the story straight.
Well, the things that would I have some quotes here from the book, and here's a story that there's no way, unless you were one of 5 people in the room, you would ever know this. And it involves, a friend of both of ours, Neil Adams. And it's told by Steve Mitchell, who was, of course, an inker, but began as a production artist and has since become a film documentarian.
Did Steve work on crypto or no?
He did not. Did he work on crypto? I think so.
No, I'm probably screwing up. I grabbed some of these images from the 13th dimension. And yes, Steve, as you say, is an inker. So please tell the story, buddy.
So here is Steve telling the story. One day, Neil Adams comes in with a drawing he's done of Tarzan to sort of prove to Joe Kubert that, well, he could do that too. Joe was very competitive. Neil was the first one to admit that Joe was great, and I think Joe would admit that Neil was great. But I think Neil was always trying to play on Joe's level. Neil was super talented, but not a great storyteller. Joe was probably one of the top 5 storytellers in comics history. He once told me that good storytelling was if you could follow the story without reading the word balloons. So Joe looks at Neil's drawing and asks if he can borrow it. He takes it back to his office, puts a piece of tracing paper over it, and with a red marker starts outlining changes. Neil made Tarzan very buff, very muscular, but Joe drew him as lean and athletic, with more of a swimmer's build. Joe's marking up Neil's pencils on his overlay. Not being nasty or snide, just showing Neil how Joe saw Tarzan. And Neil just had to grin and bear it. Neil was always looking for a fight because he always thought he was right. And a lot of times he was. As far as I'm concerned, Neil is right up there on the Mount Rushmore alongside Joe. But I always got the feeling he might have thought Kubert was just maybe a little bit better than him.
That's excellent.
Isn't that amazing? It's
yeah.
like, it's such a wonderful little story that nobody knows because, like I say, there were 5-6 people in the room, and 2 of them are dead.
This is true, and also again, cool that he recognized Joe's. He was Joe Kubert long before Neil Adams was Neil Adams, and he recognized that. I had a similar situation in my first conversation with Neil, and I wrongly said, Neil, you had the template for Batman and people like Jim Aparo. Mm-hmm. I said, was kind of doing a similar thing, and Neil corrected me, and he said, no, Jim was doing his own thing, and that was so great. And that's the thing. I think there's a short list of creators that Neil Adams would defer to, and I'm glad to hear that Joe Kubert would be one of them.
Yeah, no, I think so. Everybody knew Joe was a master. You knew it back there. There's another. It may have also been a Mitchell quote. Oh, here we go. Robert Kanigher said that drama and emotion were the key elements in his stories, and you could see, especially in those war stories, how well he understood how to use them. Kubert also understood that. Once when I was on the DC tour when I was 14 or 15, Joe was there. So in my greatest stupid moment with Joe Kubert, I said, "Gee, Mr. Kubert, how come when you draw a Tommy gun, it's not authentic, the way Russ Heath or John Severin drew it?" And he said, with no sarcasm or attitude, and almost with a wry smile, "Well, Steve, that's because I draw them emotionally."
That's great, man. Oh God. I came so close to getting Joe before he passed, and darn it, if we didn't schedule the thing, he agreed in principle. Yeah. Was so kind to me. I knew that he was really good friends with Norman Maurer, and of course they worked together at St. John on all those 3D comics back in the 50s.
Yeah, they were partners for years.
Yeah, and I had interviewed Norman about the Three Stooges because Norman, of course, Moe was Norman's father-in-law.
Right.
So immediately Joe had a couple great stories of like coming with Norman to Moe Howard's house and seeing the Stooges in action and stuff. And again, this is so great, man. And Steve is a great example of somebody that only because you worked there and worked with him, you would know to talk to him and stuff.
Sure.
It's just like a lot of the great old Hollywood interviews that I've really enjoyed in the last few years, where thank God there are surviving, not only supporting cast members, but so many important people behind the camera that were there. I mean, I got to talk to Don Nunley, who was the props keeper on Le Mans, the Steve McQueen racing movie.
Right.
And he made this incredible coffee table book about the experience of making Le Mans. And he had John Sturges stories. He had McQueen stories. Just the whole production. And I'm just like, oh my God. And the other people that he had worked with, like David Wolper, the great producer. And, he made him, did a ton of the TV Westerns of the late 50s and 60s. So, I mean, I'm like, oh, tell me more. I was just telling you, and it's a good way to tease for the Word Balloon audience. I'm going to talk to Gary Conway in a pre-recording tomorrow, the great guy from Land of the Giants and Burke's Law. So I'm looking forward to some Irwin Allen and Aaron Spelling stories from Gary, along with he was the lead in I Was a Teenage Frankenstein.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to all these stories from Gary and everything tomorrow. Yeah. But that's the thing, man. And Steve's a great guy like that. Anthony Tolan is another great guy like that, as a great colorist for DC on all those years.
Oh yeah, it's Tony had some tales to tell as well. He was in the production department for a while. He was, and then he was Jack Adler's assistant. He had the first desk when you walk in the room, and So he had a lot of experience and covered a lot of ground. Um, I love this. I love this story. This is one that Tony tells.
Tell me.
It's Jack Adler called Sal Harrison the Buddha. Sal didn't get excited, really. Heard this wonderful story about Sal and Sheldon Mayer, DC's Golden Age boy wonder editor. Shelley was kind of a wild man, and one day a book went to the engraving plant without a cover attached to it. Shelley was up in arms and yelling and screaming, and to calm him down, Sal said, and I'm going to try my Sal Harrison impression here. Shelley, I've been at comics a long time, and I go to the mom and pop shops and the newsstands to see how our books look on the stand. And I've never seen a comic book on the stands without a cover. And I'm sure by the time this book is printed, it will have a cover. Problem solved by the Buddha.
That's outstanding, man. You started with Charlton right before DC?
Yeah, my first sales were to Charlton Comics in early '75.
Now Charlton was in Derby, Connecticut. DC and certainly Marvel. I mean, we all know the history of the Marvel bullpen and both the myth and the reality, and stuff. I don't know how much exposure you had to the Marvel bullpen, but compare the Charlton offices. Did they have a bullpen at all? And also the DC offices. Well,
Charlton. I never visited Charlton. I never got up there. I was living in Brooklyn. And I never got out to Derby, so I don't really know. But from what I've heard, they didn't exactly have a bullpen, but they did have. Everything was in one place. You started at one end with the editorial. Joe Gill, one of the main writers for the company, he sat there all day typing. He probably wrote 100 pages a week, no kidding. And just tossed those over his shoulder, and they were sent out to writers, writers live in the area and came in and picked them up. When they came back, they could be lettered on the premises. They had a giant typewriter called A Machine that was it had massive planting to roll the comic size art into, and they literally typed it onto the page. I mean, it wasn't all done that way, Jim Aparo did his own lettering and their own lettering, so they didn't need that. But and then they had a color separations. They did their own color separations. They had their own printing press. They had their own loading dock. They had their own trucks and distribution network. So, a blank page would start on this end of the plant. And it would drive out that end of the plant as a printed comic book, and the place also had a catering hall and a bowling alley.
Wow! Did you ever bowl there?
I've never. My first time on that site was about 6 or 7 years ago with the Charlton documentary guys.
Yeah.
We went out there to shoot one of the early spots for the thing. Across the street from what used to be, Charlton Comics, but is now a strip mall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then of course, I love. First of all, man, this is what's great, and I've said this a million times when I talk to you. I love going to your blog because you don't throw anything away. I mean, good Lord, one of the more recent in the last couple of years were balloons that we did. You had the VHS tape of Julie Schwartz's old slide presentation from the 50th anniversary of Superman back in the late 80s, and that was terrific. But I love these photos that you drop that you've been dropping lately. Now, this is you at DC?
That's me at 75 Rock. There were behind me were editorial offices for the most part. And I believe that is Carrie Burkett.
The head behind the back of the head that we see.
That is the back of Carrie Burkett's head. I'm
trying to figure out what those two pages are or covers. I'm not really sure in front of Carey.
Yeah, I'd have to, do a lot of old man squinting through his trifocals to.
And I saw the Batman and Robin logo
Yeah.
that I remember from the early 70s and everything. So that was cool. Was that detective? I think that might have been a detective cover.
Probably it could have been. Yeah. I mean, it was 60. It was probably 77 or so. I was on staff at the time. I had another one of those cubicles that ran down the center of the hall at 75 Rock. On the other side was the production department, and then at the far end of the hall there were the business offices.
Alex Savick wrote this great line, and obviously comparing you to Red Buttons, despite how many stories Paul's written. He never got a dinner. Absolutely.
Got a dinner.
Well, right. He certainly deserves one. And David Silly is really excited. He loved your Supergirl run. Looking forward to this book. Thank you for putting all these stories together. Absolutely, man. Again, this is, back in the 80s, I was a big Amazing Heroes fan, that wonderful Fantagraphics interview magazine, and I always cite that as one of the inspirations for Word Balloon. Certainly David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interview magazine and the Comics Journal. Yeah. And we were really fortunate to get these great magazines that would come out and really talk to the creators and get that opinion of what they were thinking at the moment.
Yeah.
But again, one of the joys has been getting the stories from people like yourself when Neil was still alive, Gene Colan, the great Denny O'Neil. It's a pleasure, and I'm really glad you're doing this.
Well, not to be maudlin, but one of the things that in addition to my own advancing age was the fact that we've already lost so many people, so much. The first person, I made this list after he died, but the first person that popped into my head was Marty Pasco. Man, I'd give anything to have Marty in this book. Hell, I could probably do a book with just Marty.
Paul, you might know that I've had marathon conversations with Marty.
I recently re-listened to those. Yes.
Oh, that's nice, man. I appreciate that. No, you knew him better than I did, but I feel I can call Marty a good friend as well.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I got to spend the last 10 years or so of his life being a friend and being in a constant conversation with him. And yeah, man, what an amazing amount of stories. All right, we got some questions and I'll get to them in a second. But first, can I ask, and maybe you haven't figured it out yet, how many pages in this thing? You've got 10 interviews.
Got 10 interviews, yeah.
Do you know ballpark how many pages it's going to be altogether? Or?
Well, it's coming out to around 76,000 words. So if I play with the layout and stuff, I could probably get about 210 or 220 out of it.
That's great, man.
It'll be around the 200, 210 mark.
Okay. Part of this is me crib noting, watching your transcripts and what the book is going to look like, because as I've told you, and shame on me, man, I'm a lapsed writer, Marty, pardon me, Paul. I'm a lapsed writer. We got Pasco on the brain. Yeah. I did most of my writing in the 90s when I wrote for a boxing magazine, and it was my only outlet. I hadn't gotten back into radio. I had about a 3-year absence from the 80s to the early 90s when I broke back in. And that's when I was doing most of my writing, because that was my only outlet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's, I do this, I do, audio and video interviews, and it's that kind of satisfies the itch that my creative itch. But man, I'll tell you, I have 17 years of doing this. I feel like I got a couple books in me if I really want to sit down.
A couple of books there. Yeah.
Well, here
I encourage you to do this. I mean, hell, just like take those Marty interviews and just do, whatever. You have to figure out what's going to work for you and what you can sell and stuff. But there's something about having it in print. These things are kind of, they exist out in the ether, and
I'm with you.
But you have a book on the shelf, it's available. Like I have the Eisner book, I have Shop Talk there, and every now and then I just pick it up and go, let's see what Joe had to say. Let's see what Joe Kubert had to say, or let's see, just because, first of all, my memory's terrible. I don't remember what I read last week. So but can always do with a reread.
And I'm so with you. And when I was writing, it was for magazines. It was for Boxing Illustrated
Mhm.
and Ring Magazine. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it really was exciting once it hit the newsstands, and there's your name in print and everything, and there's a nice article. It's like, hey, I did something. That's
Yeah.
it. Got me through those years of being a bank teller by day and a boxing reporter by night. So no, I understand. Jared, go ahead. You say something, and then I'll get to some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, I have just, been thinking back on things, again, you're dwelling in the past. So you look at it and go, wow, what should I have done differently? And there are many things I should have done differently, but never is it, not become a writer, not write comic books, not, I don't, it doesn't matter how poorly the industry has treated me. No, I'm kidding. It's, but it's like it's a dog eat dog world. You have a limited shelf life in this business, and then you're replaced by less talented, newer models. But but I'm not bitter, and I think you should take that with you. That should be the takeaway. I'm not bitter. But on with the questions.
All right, fair enough, man. Well, first a comment from David Finn, who says, "Hey, Paul, we did your Peacemaker mini on our show, his podcast recently.
Oh,
Thanks
cool.
for the stories. So that's cool." And then Jared has an interesting question. Loves seeing the two of. That's great. He saw both of us at your booth, Paul, at Terrificon this summer. He's
Cool.
curious if you have any thoughts on Carmine Infantino's time as the president of DC.
Yeah, I mean, and we of course talk about that in the book because in 1975, Carmine was on this way out. Jeanette would come in February 76, was it?
That sounds about right. 76 or 77, I would assume. Yeah.
And and Carmine. Again, I talk about this with like Paul Levitz, whereas I expect him to talk about our days doing fanzines and stuff. He starts talking about how he's this 18-year-old and coming in and taking over the business department and his relationships with with Leibowitz and whatever. And it's like, yes, I never would have thought to ask you about this stuff because I know his he takes the business side of what he did very seriously, and there's confidentialities and all that stuff. But it was like it was awesome to hear him talk about that that time, and other people as well. What Carmine was a great editorial director. He brought DC out of the artistic doldrums it was in. He started goosing up the art, and the covers improved, and because he started designing all of them, and and then he would put people like Bob Oxner on, to do the major covers and things like that. So he was really good at what he did. But then when it came time for somebody, when all these when the business changed and Warner's this and that was happening, and it was time to bring in real business people, Carmine wasn't suited for that. He wasn't a businessman. Sal Harrison wasn't a businessman. Sal Harrison was a production manager. The fact that they were both charged with doing business, it's like Paul tells a story. He says he's talking to Sal about licensing, about which Paul knew nothing at the time. And he figured Sal's been working with LCA, Licensing Corporation of America, and he says to Sal, "So, what are you looking for in these contracts for licensing?" And Sal's response was, "You want to make sure that everybody has signed the copies." That was his business advice.
Yeah.
And Carmine was equally over his head in a lot of things, and he also didn't, I don't think, had the temperament for it. because, he was always a grumpy old son of a bitch. So, I admired him. He was the artist of my childhood. He was, he drew the DC universe as far as I was concerned. And, geez, look at it. He did. He was, I didn't latch on to Jack Kirby, man. I was latched on to Carmine Infantino. He was great at that, but, didn't belong behind a desk.
Well, and Jeanette coming in, my God, she was so young, but so accomplished. I read Dynamite Magazine and Pizzazz, those great magazines that were part of the Scholastic Book Club when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they had those wonderful little comic book articles, and they would have origins of heroes, and it was great. I was already buying my 20 and 25-cent comics, but it was great to see them in a slick magazine. And I imagine because of all that, that's what made her attractive to DC.
Sure. Well, she had done Pizzazz and Dynamite, and I think another one as well. I think there were like two or three very successful kids magazine launches. She was one of them was for Xerox, I believe, and
okay.
So yeah, she came in at 27 years old, 26, 27 years old already. With a background. She knew nothing about comics. I mean, she was a fan. She was a reader. She had read them as a kid. She enjoyed them, but she didn't know anything about the comics or the comic book industry. She was smart enough to recognize the smartest kid in the classroom to come work with her. She saw Paul Levitz and saw what, he was very young, very, very, unformed and kind of like, we're a bunch of sloppy old little fanboys. And, well, the guys, we'd come into the office and Julie Schwartz and Murray Boltonoff, even Neil wore a shirt and tie and a jacket when he came into the office. He'd sit at his drawing board with his sleeves rolled up in a tie. We started coming in T-shirts and jeans. And, and then Jeanette was like, well, I don't think she expected anything different from us. Which she was also great with the older guys. I mean, those, they came to appreciate her.
Okay.
I'm sure there was a lot of resistance. I mean, I never talked to her or Julie about it, but there had to be, who's this little girl coming in?
100%, man. Yeah.
Generation, the way they thought. But, she came in and she proved herself, and she again found the right partner. I think she would have eventually learned and done just fine, but Paul was a valuable asset to that company. He helped keep it going and evolve in his time there. So
I want people to obviously buy the book, and by the way, there's still I'm going to check how many days left. You're only doing a 20-day campaign, I noticed, man. All right, so
yeah, there's 13 days left.
Yes, and you're about 800 short of the goal,
right? So
it is attainable, and I'm happy to, obviously give you the promotion here, and hopefully people watching. Hey, everybody! First of all, obviously, if you want, I'm going to share the screen because I want to. Let me see if I can do that. Where the hell's the share the screen thing? There it is. They changed the buttons on me. But I want people to know. Here we go. Boom. So yeah, first of all, if you just want where the hell is it? I'm gonna scroll up now. So if you just want the PDF, it's $10. So I mean, there's a great value for an ebook, but only $20 to get the paperback edition, and then $30 for both paperback and PDF. But and then also acknowledging your previous book, Direct Comments, which we talked about before, and that was a collection of interviews that you had done for the for the Inner Office DC newsletter, basically. Am I right?
Yeah, for the comic shop, DC Direct Currents comic.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, those direct current. Sure, I remember those. Absolutely. The freebie that would sit at the cashier stand and
Right.
everything.
This was the one from the late 80s and 90s that was, full color comic book size, printed on Mando paper.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's a great collection of interviews as well. So it's really easy to get involved, and I can't recommend it enough. And let's not only get you to your goal, but hell, let's get you over your goal. I mean, I just saw on Twitter you were surprised that right now the contributions and everything for the campaign, Twitter has not accounted for very many, and that was surprising.
It has not done itself proud. Only for 27% of my of the referrals from outside of Kickstarter came from the 13th Dimension plug, but only 4% of the backers were referrals came from Twitter, and I think Twitter should be embarrassed. I mean, to be honest. But
Well, the good news is we're live on Twitter now, so we're scolding our viewers.
Oh.
Absolutely, man. Let's go. And truly, this is great because honestly, this group of people were so important to DC. They're your peers. I mean, it's great. I mean, Bob Rozakis. I gotta bug you to give me his contact info because I met him very briefly at one of Mitch's Terrificon shows. And I would love to talk to him because not only as the Answer Man, of course, but which I loved when he would do those great articles and stuff. But I am a massive fan of this. All right, let's see. There it is. It is the best 6-page or 8-page backup feature ever. The Private Life of Clark Kent.
Yeah.
It was honestly because this is what I love about Superman, and specifically, it's so funny. It almost seems like for newer readers, it's like, oh, Clark had a life, has a life, and certainly Byrne explored that as well. But again, during the Bronze Age, guys like Bob were doing it, and it's like, no, I want a Clark Kent story. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, I mean, Clark appeared for a few pages in most Superman stories. They do a bit. Steve Lombard would do pull a practical joke. Lois would try to, pull up his shirt to see if he was whatever, and then they would just kind of go away. But these were nice little stories just set in that world. It was like some of my favorite. The TV Super, the Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. They saved Superman. They used Superman sparingly, and that was cool because you mainly got to see Clark, who was not, of course, the wimp. For some reason, Lois was always chiding him about being a wimp, and it's like, no, he's always like running right into it. What are you talking about? But go fight cliche conventions of 1950s children television.
But you're right. I love that about the George Reeves show because he is a tough investigative journalist, and I always say, Jimmy always says, God, I wish Mr. Kent were here. He'd know what to do.
Yeah.
Or when Clark would have the face-to-faces with Inspector Henderson, and Henderson would feed him a line of back off, reporter. Don't give me that nonsense, Bill. We both know the truth. Give it to me straight. All right, Kent. And it's like, yeah, man, that's Clark Kent. He was, and you can see George Reeves had that very serious look, and even behind those horn-rimmed glasses, it's like, don't mess with Clark Kent, man. He knows what he's doing. I love that.
Will forever be the first, and he will forever be the second and the greatest.
That's true. Kirk Allen, exactly, first.
Yeah.
But I've never really sat down and watched the serials. Are they like for the Kent scenes? Because obviously the serials, great appreciation for them,
sure,
but obviously a little clunky. I mean, I don't know.
Especially the Superman one, they didn't solve the flying problem. They just went to animation. So they have this, very obviously animated black and white, flash across the screen. Hey, it was 1947 or 48, whatever.
Yeah.
And, state of the art for cheapy, what was it? I don't know if it was Republic, but Monogram, but it was one of those, Poverty Row producers. it was cool. And Kirk Allen was solid. Phyllis Coates kicks ass no matter where and when.
Phyllis Coates, I love her. Absolutely, man.
So, I mean, Noel Neal was always so, whiny and,
Oh, that's hilarious, man. No, I had a big crush on Noelle, I have to say,
she was crushable. And frankly, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, it's like, check out the stockings and the high heels. Hey, this is back in the 60s for me, long before there was all this great, available free porn on the internet. So
I hear you, man. That's fantastic. Here, I'm going to show a couple more pictures of you. This is you, as you said, in your bedroom, typing out, it looks like a Charlton script. Am I right?
That was a Charlton script. It was 1975. It was in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. I lived about 8 blocks away from Levitt's. And we used to do the fanzines together. There's a poster for The Candidate, one of my favorite movies, on the wall.
Oh, that's great, man. I love that movie.
I was a movie theater usher at a second house in Brooklyn called the Granada, which coincidentally, back in the 1920s, my grandfather had been a projectionist at. The owner of the place when I was there in the 1970s had been an usher and remembered my grandfather, as did the ticket lady, the ticket seller, who was trained by my grandmother in another theater in Brooklyn in the 40s or whatever. And my grandfather had also died in his car parked outside that movie theater.
Wow.
1930. So
wow.
But But so you had to go down into this creepy rat-infested basement to shut off the main switch at the end of the day. So, but there are all these movie posters, just stacks of movie posters. So we'll just used to grab them and just paper walls with them.
That's excellent. See, this is another reason why we're friends, Paul, because my grandmother's brothers were their Greek name was Diamandikas, so they went by Diamond, and the Diamond brothers here in Chicago were Nickelodeon film projectors, and that's how they could afford to bring my grandmother to the States.
I still have my my grandfather's. He was from New York, from Brooklyn, but he went to electrician school in Philadelphia, and I still have my grandmother's letters to him from that time in 1919, before they were married. And I also have some of his notebooks, and there's this massive chart about film lenses and focal points and shit, from 1918 or whatever. I still have that. I have some of that stuff in my.
Of course you do. Yeah, that's again, man. This is
fortunately my father and mother saved a lot of family documents. So I have birth certificates and immigration papers and stuff of my grandparents and things like that. So, I have a copy of the Telegraph from the tuberculosis sanitarium in Colorado, where my other grandfather died as a young man in 1934. And my grandmother's reply. They asked what should be done with the body, because she was living in Cleveland at the time. No, in Cleveland, that's right. And her reply was just like the most heartbreaking thing I ever read. It was, am indigent. Give him a pauper's funeral, essentially.
Potter's Field, yeah.
Like, so yeah, a lot of that stuff. It puts you in touch with family members. I never knew that grandfather. Obviously, he died in 1934.
Sure.
And as you can see, I'm well into the past. I'm into the past. I'm into the history, which is why I got to this book. But yeah, I mean, my mother and her sister had to go into an orphanage for 3 years because my grandmother couldn't keep, like 1930s. Like,
yeah,
wow,
yeah.
an orphanage.
No, I've heard other families with that problem,
Yeah.
having a bunch of kids not being able to take care of all of them. So yeah, the kids were sent to orphanages or other families to live and everything. And you think about it now, it's like, oh my God, that's just, horrific.
And
but again, it's
all the
what can
more
you do?
so, made all the more so that I have some of the letters home my 8-year-old mother or 6, 7, 8-year-old mother wrote, and it was all very happy and sunshiny. And I'm taking care of Maura, her little sister, and it's like I said, I didn't see this stuff until after she died.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because I cleaned out her place and I got all this stuff. Suddenly I'm finding this is like,
wow.
I would have liked to have heard that story, Mom.
Yeah.
But
no, I get it.
They didn't talk. Yeah. And another
Well,
goddamn book, because there's history that people need to talk about that they don't or they forget to.
Well, that's the thing, man. And again, the business has changed dramatically. I mean, we're standing on land that is ever shifting under our feet currently with all the. I mean, God, this week, in fact, there's probably another round of layoffs coming at Warner's.
Yes.
And DC's going to be impacted by that, I'm sure. And God, I having gone through it in radio, my heart goes out to everybody, and I hope everybody lands as securely as possible or finds other places. A lot of our people that we know have found other homes at other publishers or other companies and stuff. And every time it happens, believe me, I like I said, 30 years in Chicago radio, I certainly lived my share through those kind of times as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, Paul, in our talk, Paul talks about how, I brought up the fact that, back then in 1973, the young guys, the Bernie Wrightsons and the Chakins and Coluto, they were sitting around the coffee room with DC going, comics are going to be dead in a few years, so we might as well get what we can now, and then we'll go on and become famous illustrators. But at least we'll have scratched that itch. And they didn't die. And and a guy like Bernie, who otherwise would have gone out to probably become one of the premier illustrators of his time, stayed in comic books. But Paul argued that in a lot of ways these guys were right, that comic books as we knew them did die. That the evolution over the years of into the direct market and the comic shops, the product was different. The product we were making, sold on the newsstand was made for 13-year-olds, 8 to 13-year-olds. The product we were making once we got the comic shop stuff going was for 40-year-olds. And it was it had a different market. It had a different designation as a piece of merchandise. It had a different wholesale route and everything. So the 12 said, crappy newsprint comic book that we knew did die, and in fact continues to die and be reborn, and we're into like yet another incarnation. I think there's a total validity, and again, you can read it in direct conversations.
Absolutely, man, and truly, God, I even grabbed from Dan Greenfield's 13th Dimension website, because in promotion of the book, so many great splash pages from the era and everything, and these are just beautiful. I love all of these.
And these first or earliest stuff that I tried to grab.
Well, there you go, man. And look, one of my favorite titles, The Secret Society of Supervillains, Captain Comet against the group of bad guys and stuff. And there's some great New God action right there with Darkseid. And is that the Black Racer or no?
I didn't.
Up on the right, I don't know if that was the Black Racer. It kind of looked like him.
I think
although he's speaking, so maybe not. Or no, he's not speaking. That's Darkseid speaking. Anyway, but these are just great. And no, compare those to comics from the 80s. I would say even in certainly in the last 20 years, today's comics vastly different from the early aughts.
Totally.
I mean, it's an ever-changing medium that's trying to address the changes in distribution, whether it's digital now, comic book size. I mean, Jeanette came in and brought the dollar comics, and those big anthologies back with things like Superman Family and Batman Family and things like that.
Sure.
Adventure. Again, they were each era, tried to suit the needs of whoever the current reader was.
And in fact, Michael Uslan tells the story that the dollar comics were an outgrowth of the Comic Mobile.
Oh, that's great! I love hearing about the Comic Mobile. That's great. That was to explain what that was.
For those who don't know, in 1973, DC Vice President Sal Harrison decided to. It's a comic book mobile. It was a good humor truck with comic books. First driven by Michael Uslan down by the Jersey Shore in the early part of the summer, and then picked up by Bob Rozakis, who did it out in Long Island where he lived. And these guys just drove around to parks and beachfronts and recreational places and stopped their white van and said, "Hey, kids, come here." It wasn't creepy at all. No, I swear. And they would sell the latest DC comics out of this truck, and they did fairly well. And it was kind of a self-funded research tool.
Sure.
Rozakis, Uslan found out that he couldn't keep enough plops in stock, and kids loved plop. And the first issue just sold out, and it was like, thank God when the second issue came out. But one of the things they found out was that titles like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, kids didn't really associate the big Lois Lane or the big Jimmy Olsen with Superman. So those books were kind of drifting, because even though Superman was always on the cover, and let's face it, Jimmy Olsen had some of the freakiest freaking covers.
Come on.
Which you couldn't help but notice. But still, that hurt the sales. So they decided to abandon those individual titles and roll them all into one book. And since Supergirl wasn't doing as well either, they included her. And thus, you had Superman Family, which had the Batman family, and I don't know, Sergeant Rock family. There was the whole mishpacha.
Indeed, the whole mishpacha. Absolutely, man. That's great. I don't know if you noticed this weekend at New York Comic Con, they basically announced that Action was going to be retooled into a modern Superman family book, where John Kent's stories are going to move, and also a couple of the kids that Superman befriended on War World when he was stuck there with young Mongol, and that great story that Philip Kennedy Johnson started over there. I'm going to talk to Philip in the next couple of weeks about that. But there you go, man. And no, I was a massive Batman family fan as well. It's crazy. I guess because I had older cousins that read comics, and my older brother, my stepbrother, I still liked Lois Lane, and I still like Jimmy Olsen, Mr. Action, as I remember, as he got older.
Well, back in the late 80s, it was like Pete Costanza was drawing Jimmy Olsen. And I have a weird kind of love for cheesy artists, like Pete Costanza and Paul Reinman and Sal Trapani, and just those guys who really weren't good. Not that they weren't trying. I am convinced that Paul Reinman woke up every day saying, "I'm going to sit down and do the best work I can."
Sure.
I don't think anybody ever sits down going, "I'm going to draw shit." Not
100%, man.
Not even fucking Vinnie Coletta. I love these guys. They tried so hard. Paul Reinman, I mean, geez, that mid-60s Archie superhero stuff was just so beautifully awful. It was,
Was Reinman doing like the Jaguar, or was he doing Captain Pureheart and all that stuff?
Jaguar was John Rosenberg.
Oh, okay. So, or was it? So was it the superhero line that Archie did, or was it Captain Hero and Evil Heart?
This was the Mighty Hero stuff from the
Okay, the Crusaders, sure. Yeah.
Crusaders and all those guys.
Yeah, the Shield and the Fly and people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Joe Siegel was writing those,
Yes.
and Paul
Jerry Siegel, yes.
was drawing most of them. And they were, they were terrible. They were goofy. They made no sense. They didn't have, because it was, again, the readers were 8 to 12 years old. And by the time they were old enough to realize none of this shit made sense, they'd moved on.
100%. You're looking at one of those people, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so great. Honestly, Paul, this is what I'm saying, man. This was, everyone's childhood. The comics we read were the greatest time. You will never budge Robert Kirkman from, as much as people look at the 90s as such a horrible era and stuff. Robert adored it because those were his first comics. And I get that. That's wonderful.
I have long said the golden age of comics is 11 years old.
Yes.
Whatever you read and imprints on you when you're 11 years old, you're going to love that the rest of your life because, it's the thing. This is an age when you start thinking and when you start creating and when you start realizing, that scribble isn't a drawing. This is a drawing, or this is a story. You may not be able to accomplish anything with that knowledge, but at least you start to be aware, you're aware of it. So that stuff is very important, So my 11 years old is 1966. Pick a better year, like, all right, 68 would have been better, maybe.
Well, yeah, but 66 was a damn good year, not only for comics, but television as well.
Sure.
I seem to recall, I think a superhero show might have had a big impact in 1966.
Oh, yeah. Captain Nice and Mr. Terrific. Sure. Both of those. It was wonderful.
But, I hear you, man. That's hilarious. I didn't realize that 66 was when all the networks really shifted from black and white to color.
Sure. We didn't until, about 68, 9 until we got a color set. But, but there was Star Trek also. There was Man from U.N.C.L.E., Mission Impossible. Was that a little later or was that around the same time?
I think that was around the same time. And also Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea went to color.
Yeah.
And Man from U.N.C.L.E. went to color.
Time Tunnel. Yeah.
Time Tunnel. Well, as I said, I was telling you, I'm talking of Land of the Giants vet Gary Conway, and can't wait. And then, by the way, not only Gary Conway, but Jerry Conway. My 11 years old was 75.
Sure. Exactly
the meat of the era of this book that you're putting out, Direct Comments.
Yeah.
And or Direct Conversations, excuse me. And that's why it was such a thrill, and I'm so glad that I got to talk as extensively as I did to Denny, and talks with Elliot Maggin, and talks with Jerry Conway. I always tell Jerry when he killed Gwen Stacy, I read it in Marvel Tales. I didn't read it in the original Amazing Spider-Man run.
Right.
But I was like 9 or 10 years old, and my brain exploded. I'm like, wait, she's dead? This isn't an imaginary story. She's dead. What the hell's going on? And it didn't turn me postal. I didn't become a serial killer. It ignited my imagination, and story said consequences, even for a 10 or 11-year-old kid.
Yeah, it was very important to us what happened in those stories. But it didn't seem to have the same life and death implications it seems to have for people these days. I have heard people, say that they're bereft because such and such character wasn't appearing in a TV show or a movie, or it wasn't what they expected it to be. And it's like, Get a Life doesn't even begin to cover it.
I so hear you, man. God, again, in the 70s, we had those ridiculous NBC specials where they had the superhero roast and the original 70s Marvel movies that looked nothing like the comics, the Doctor Strange movie, and
this Doctor Strange movie holds up.
I think it's fun. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Reb Brown. Captain America, Reb Brown. It was such a pleasure at Terrificon again, getting to meet Reb Brown. And I'm like, hey man, and the second movie, at least the costume looked a little more like classic, Captain America. But Jesus, Red Brown, it's like could you cast a bigger, perfect physical specimen to be Steve Rogers? And also his portrayal was so earnest. And it's like, I'm like, hey man, you're Steve Rogers. And he hugged me, which was so sweet.
I mean, no artist sets out to make a bad piece of art, even a schlock TV show, you
100%.
My name is still on it. I did a book a few years ago called, I never write for the money, but I always turn in the manuscript for a check. And, the point is, and it sounds like bullshit, but I don't care what I'm getting paid for the job. If I'm getting paid and my name, I'm going to do my best work, whether it's top rate or, honorarium money.
I so hear you, man. I'm putting in your website, paulkupperberg.com, because I do really, as always, want people to go there and check out. Am I right? Is it .com or .org or?
Yep.
.com. Okay, great. Because truly, and we talk about it every time we're on, Paul has so many great books, both on the process of writing comics, his own personal anecdotes of his time in the business, and again, that Direct Currents collection that is a great precursor to the Direct Conversation book and everything. There it is. Boom. Hold on. I'm gonna zoom in, Paul, so people can get a better look at the cover. There you go. Boom.
Yep.
So, and again,
direct from me.
No, it's great, man. And again, I'm so glad you're doing this. In the Levitts, because again, I don't want you to reveal more than you're willing to. But in the Levitts conversation, do you talk about the DC implosion of '78 and that moment of the line really being in jeopardy of going away? Do we need to keep making new comics? Can't we just reprint the old stuff?
We didn't go that deep into the weeds on that one. It was, again, like, I in the back of my head, I go, oh yeah, I got to bring up the implosion. And then we veer left. And it's like, by the time we get back to it, we up an hour ago.
Sure. No. And again, my man, I swear, as you know, it's like, oh, I should have talked about whatever. And again, that's why I have multiple interviews. And it's like, all right, I'll get him. I'll get him on the next one. That's why, God, man, Larry O'Neill came to me when Denny, it was after his car accident from a few years ago.
Yeah.
And he's like, my dad's just sitting around. He really enjoyed talking to you. Would you call him? I'm like, would I call him? I'm like, Larry, I've been meaning to call Denny back for years, but poor Denny just always had trouble with his health.
Yeah.
And also when he lost his wife too. And I'm like, I would check in. Mike Gold was always my touchstone for Denny. And I'd be like, is he okay? Or what? And then, it's really not a good time. All right, well, and the next thing I know, it's been a couple of years. So it's like, oh, thank God. And we just had this lovely conversation, two of them actually. And oh man, I'm so glad I got him and got him on record. And such a sweet guy. And of course, broke my heart when he passed. That
was a tough. There have been a few tough ones over lately. Have been difficult. Denny was one of them. Neil was just I mean, I wasn't particularly close to Neil, but I've known him since I was a kid. And despite the fact that he once commented that he hated only 3 people in the world, Donald Trump, Adolf Hitler, and my brother, he was always such a sweetheart to me. And,
well, that's good.
Always very nice. And I just, and again, he was such an intricate part of my childhood. I don't remember a lot of the first time I ever saw this guy or that guy, but I remember that cover of Action Comics, Son of the Annihilator, which was, his first Superman cover for DC Comics. I remember seeing that thing on the rack and leaping halfway across the store to grab it. Not because of, some goofy kid in Marlon Brando motorcycle leathers punching the monument, the George Washington monument, but the artwork. I mean, like Kurt Swan is great. Love Kurt Swan.
Of course.
Kurt Swan. But what the hell is this? And when I heard, Neil died, my first thought was that can't be right. Neil is integral to the plot, and
Yeah.
he really has been, throughout comics, from his work for Siegel and Schuster, and creator rights, and artwork return. Sometimes I mean, I think sometimes he took more credit than he deserved. But what the hell? He was the face. Jerry Robinson worked behind the scenes and got Siegel and Schuster their due, but Neil was out there making noise and bring attention to this stuff. So
True, man. Yeah.
So he was very important, and plus the fact, Jesus Christ, what an artist! How many talents like that will we ever have? Because Neil was an original, and a lot of the talents I see even today, 50 years, 60 years after he started, are still feeding off of what he created.
So true.
Some of the top artists in the business, and I think if you went to them and said, "You're still doing Neil, aren't you?" They'd go, "Well, yeah, who better?"
100%, man. And Continuity Studios was such an important learning ground for so many people. And I'm very fortunate that Neil spoke to me the times that he did, and also I could never afford even those great 3x5 sketches because they were so expensive. But in his last couple of years, he was I asked him about these. He made these affordable sketches, headshots of Superman and Batman. And I'm like, well, I got to get a Batman. And I think it was only like $150. And I said, Neil, forgive me, because I could kind of see they were slightly mass produced. And I said, are you light boxing? He goes, I am light boxing. However, I swear to you, every line on that page is me. And I'm like, good enough for me, man. Yeah. That's great. Please sign it. Please personalize it. And I'm so glad that I've got this fantastic Batman head that Neil drew, and more than enough for me, man. And it's and like you said, also I'll use some Yiddish. The guy was a stalker. I mean, he really and that's why I think too the sad turn in his health his last year or so was such a shock.
Yeah.
And it's and really I'm sure you felt the same way. It's like, all right, he'll get over it. He's got too strong of a constitution,
I mean, I had seen him, because of COVID, it had been a few years, but I had seen him, at 2019, I guess had been the last time I saw him at Terrificon. And again, there's Neil, and you're like, what was he, 80 at the time?
Yeah.
And he looked great. He looked, he looked like he was in better health than me, which is not saying a lot, but still.
I'll say it. Better than me, man. 30 years older than me.
Yeah.
And well, about 20 or 25. But yeah, man, no, you're right. And I felt the same way, man. No, and I'm glad not only I couldn't afford the original, I bought so many prints and reproductions of his classic covers, and got a great print that he did of Rick and a zombie from The Walking Dead. Great pen and ink thing, but he made it into a print. And I hung it in my radio studio. And, at the height of the Walking Dead TV series, and clients and coworkers would come in and go, that's supposed to be The Walking Dead. It's like, yeah, who drew that? I'm like, this guy, Neil Adams, if you know comics, the guy's a legend. And also a lot of bravado, but much like a Muhammad Ali could back it up.
Well, I was just thinking, shortly after he died, somebody posted a video of him teaching. I guess it must have been a middle school or a high school, young high school kids. And they're sitting around a table, and they're all drawing. They all got paper. And Neil is showing them how to hold a pen. And Neil is showing them how to move his arm, how to move their arms, and how to draw so that they never get tired.
Oh, wow.
Brilliant. He takes about 10, you got to search this out. He takes about 10, 15 minutes, and he's explaining that, I don't work from here. I work from here, and my hand is over. And he shows how to hold, how to hold the point. And it's just this, I had never seen anybody go into kind of like, it's like the sports medicine of art, which muscles to use to get the best.
Sure.
And never heard anybody do it, talk about that. I only hear guys, Neil doesn't have the artist bump. So many artists have that little bump on their finger from holding the pen.
Sure.
Up his hand and goes, I don't have the artist bump because I don't. But I just hold the tip with my fingers and never rubs it. And but it was fascinating. I watched it twice. But this is what was going on in that head. And maybe he articulated it more than I ever heard. But that was just, I thought that was brilliant.
My friend Doug Klauba years ago on eBay bought this 16 millimeter film, and it was a print that was made to distribute to schools, art schools, I'm assuming, in our classes. And it was this episode of a Canadian produced television show called Behind the Scene.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to DC and Marvel. And I'm sure you've seen snippets of it over the years in documentaries. It had a great story session between Stan Lee and Archie Goodwin where they were going over the designs of the Human Fly. Steranko is in his office, and his office looks like a 1930s detective office, and he's totally dressed for the part. There's a great scene of Neil, Julie, and Denny O'Neil, and it was recreated for this TV show, but it was a story session for Superman and Muhammad Ali.
Right.
And it's great. Denny had a full head of hair, and it was curly and everything, and Neil looks great. Have you seen this thing? Have I sent you? Because I got a copy of it, and I've sent it because I don't own the footage. There's a jerk on YouTube that posted the whole thing. It's like, I own this. And it's like, no, you don't. You got it just like I got it. Yeah. Don't be a jerk. But with a time code on it. And it's like, yeah, whatever. But I don't know if I haven't sent it to you, I will, Paul.
You haven't, and I'd love to see it. But that just reminded me of yet another Steve Mitchell quote.
Please.
About Neil. Speaking of Sal Harrison and Deadline, I was there the day Neil brought in the very late penciled pages for the Superman versus Muhammad Ali tabloid. A bunch of us were in one of the artist bullpen areas, and Sal was going through the pages one by one, just flipping them over and not saying a word. Finally, he gets to the last page, and he turns to Neil and says in that dry nasal voice of his, Adams, it's the best thing you've ever done, and not worth the wait.
That's awesome, man. So,
but that was Neil, to him, he didn't care. He wasn't paying the late fees to the printer. To him, it was, it was important that it be the best thing he's ever done. And, frankly, I think that will stand as, one of the absolute high points of his career.
No question. Yeah, I had the pleasure to talk to him at length about that book. Also, Denny, and also his homage to that great cover that he did for ESPN magazine.
Yeah.
That had Michael Jordan and Ali fighting, and all the different sports celebrities in the audience. The way that, and also it was great to learn that originally Kubert did a pass on the cover, and then the assignment went to Neil.
I think Joe was supposed to do the entire book. I think.
Okay.
I mean,
there you go.
Sure, but that would be the only reason why they would have somebody else do the cover. It wouldn't be Joe on the outside, Neil on interiors.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean I've seen that that image is around, and it's essentially the same kind of deal. That it's Joe's version of, or Neil did his version of what Joe had originally done. But yeah, I've seen it, and I thought, again, if Joe had done it, no complaints, But frankly, I can't. This is one of those jobs where I can't imagine anybody else doing it. Like the Superman Spider-Man book, man. Who else could have drawn that book? But Ross Andrew and
Mike Esposito.
Yeah. Dick Giordano.
Oh, pardon me. I thought Esposito inked it. There you go. See, Paul. This is why I love talking to you. Let's get the record straight. Absolutely, man.
It was Dick and some Neil Adams.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, Neil liked to, go in to people's offices, and if he saw something he'd like, he'd ink it.
Well, I noticed too on one of the splash pages, I think it's this one, that it's a Chaikin page.
Yeah,
and you can see on the bottom. I know you need an eye chart to read it, all the credits, but Denny wrote it. Howard drew the pencils, but the Krusty Bunkers did the inks. And that's great, man. And of course, the Krusty Bunkers, the infamous, hey, we need this book done. let's get several inkers on this to finish the job.
It was whoever was passing through the office. Again, Steve Mitchell, my brother, Alan Weiss, Chaikin, whoever was passing through. If there was a job on the board that needed doing, they just threw in and did whatever. It was a weird little. I think Marvel had their own equivalent, didn't they? They had.
Yes, they did.
What were they called?
That's it's funny. I always assumed that they also were called the Krusty Bunkers, but maybe not. I don't know.
I don't remember, but yeah, that was Neil was doing addition in it. Well, for the most part, he wasn't doing comics for a long time. I mean, advertising paid so much better that he had to do that stuff. He was doing print ad work as well as animatronics, which were commercial
animation
storyboards.
Yeah. He when I talked to him, and it was funny, it was brand new then. People might remember one of those ask your doctor to get you, and the product was an allergy product called Nasonex, and it had this little animated bee. You would not think this is Neil Adams' work, but he's like, oh yeah, I just did this thing for Nasonex, and I'm like, I saw that. I never would have thought that was Neil Adams. But again, that's what Continuity did. They did so many projects like that.
Yeah. Well, who would ever think that the Pillsbury Doughboy was the product of Shelley Moldoff? It was like,
and Marty Nodell too, right?
Marty Nodell, excuse me.
I had the pleasure. Man, there was a guy. He would come back to Chicago because he worked for Leo Burnett, our famous advertising agency. Yeah. But after his wife had passed, he just didn't want to do interviews anymore. And he was very sweet to me. But he's like, ever since Carrie died, I don't have that ambition anymore. And I'm like, I'm not going to bother you, Mr. Nodell. It's a pleasure. And I got a great little Alan Scott sketch from him and stuff. Yeah. What a guy. What a guy.
Watercolor. No, that's
cool.
I keep confusing these two guys. Jesus.
That's all right. Well,
also, I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting. So, I got into comics in 1975. The business was 40 years old at that time. It is, so I've been in the comic book business for 47 years. So, more than half its existence. I've been doing this stuff. And in that time, not only did I get to work for Julie Schwartz, but, over the years, you'd run into all these guys who, not only did I grow up on, but predated me, that also. That includes Joe Kubert and Joe Giella and, Win Mortimer and Kurt Swan and Kurt Schaffenberger. I mean, Kurt Swan was doing Boy Commandos,
wow,
in a brilliant, Simon and Kirby impersonation back in 1940 or 41. But all these guys, they pass through the office and get a chance to, at least shake their hands.
That's awesome, man.
And so I always had a connection to the history because I was always interested in it. The book that really just woke up the ambition to be a part of it, to be a professional, was the Jules Feiffer Great Comic Book Heroes. That was, probably the greatest book ever published. It was just, and not only for what it reprinted, but for what Pfeiffer wrote. That introduction about his getting into comics in the 40s and the stories and how these guys operated. It was a cheap shit organization. You were getting $5 a page, or if you got paid, it was all just rushed, and it was like, oh man, because I always wanted to be a 1930s pulp writer. Sitting there with my hat pushed back on my head and smoking a cigarette and pounding my heart on a typewriter.
Raw typewriter.
That's the foolish thing to be,
No, dude, yes. I mean, again, because of my older cousins and my stepbrother and stuff, when the paperbacks would reprints of Doc Savage and The Shadow would come out, I poured over all that stuff. The Avenger,
And my old man, first time he saw a Conan paperback, like 67 or so, that I had brought home. He looked at it and he went, Isn't that the guy they used to call the Lion of Amra? How the hell do you know that, Dad? Oh, I used to read Weird Tales when I was a kid. My dad was born in 1921. So,
My
he's 11 years old, 1930 freaking two.
my dad was 1927.
Yeah.
And it was before I was 10 years old. We were on a vacation in Wisconsin, and we were at a gift shop, and one of the Treasury edition, the white covered Treasury edition of Shazam, the Captain Marvel book.
Yeah.
And my dad's like, "Hey, that's Captain Marvel. I used to read that. You want this?" And I'm like, "Yes, please."
Yeah. Well, my father.
And he was thrilled. He read it. But he's like, "I remember this stuff. This is great."
Yeah. My old man started bringing home, Edgar Rice Burroughs and this was during, the height of the Ace paperback reprints with those Frazetta and Roy G. Krenkel covers and
yes,
awesome editions. And I ate that stuff up. That stuff was just, it was chocolate syrup. I could just eat it raw. It was great, these things I could read, 2 or 3 in a day, and they were just like awesome. Along with paperback, TV paperback adaptations of the 60s, everything from Get Smart to Dr. Kildare or whatever. I ate that stuff up. It was great. I mean, I also read, fortunately I also read, what my teachers called real books.
Yeah, exactly.
Because in 5th grade, during the free reading period in 5th grade, my teacher saw me reading a Get Smart novel by William Johnston and took it away from me and replaced it with John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. And I went home and told my mother, and my mother was incensed. So she went to school the next day and got my Get Smart book back. And I got to keep Profiles in Courage.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I read it,
Oh, no, I read that as well in grade school.
It's one of my favorite Sorensen books.
I was going to say Ted Sorensen, of course, the real writer of Profiles in Courage, but that's all right.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I had a similar thing with my brother-in-law and my youngest nephew who wasn't enjoying reading. So I started giving him comics, and both of my nephews were big sport kids. And my stepbrother or my brother-in-law was also a big kid athlete, and even as an adult was still playing hockey and stuff, and park district games for adults. And he's like, the kids really aren't into the geeky stuff. They're really more into athletic stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if you noticed, but the kid is reading these comic books, and he was having trouble getting into reading. So isn't the fact that he's reading good? And to his credit, he thought for a second and said, you're right. I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, man. I understand the reflex of, hey, I don't want to, I don't want to raise a nerd. But I'm like, the good news is, man, they like this. Both of them actually love comics. They like the stories. They like the art, and especially the older one really got into reading. The younger one, at least he was reading something. Yeah. So it's like, that's all I'm saying, man. Just and as I'm sure it was the case with you, my father taught me to read by reading the funnies, the comic strips.
Yeah, I mean, I was not a strong reader until I hit like 4th grade, and then I suddenly, I got bitten by it, and just I was off to the races.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just it's. But and again, back then, you had 3 choices of what to do. You could watch TV, you could read a book, or get your ass out of the house and do something. Right?
You're 100%. I'm so with you, man. Absolutely. Yeah. You're killing me. Do you real fast? Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right, man. Mr. Deere wanted to know who came up with the digests from the 80s, I'm assuming. Well, and of course the paperback stuff from the 60s and 70s, where they would reprint comics in paperback form.
Yeah, there was a great period there when the Batman TV show came out. They did a couple of Batman paperback reprints. They cut up and rearranged the old stories in paperback format. I think there was a Superman one as well, and there were a couple of Batman novels. the and Marvel also did a couple of novels. The very good The Great Gold Steel, Captain America and the Great Gold Steel by Ted White, and the execrable the Avengers versus the Earthwrecker by Otto Binder.
Otto Bender.
It was I like Binder, but man, that was a bad book.
Ha!
That was that was just clearly he had affinity any longer, or at least for this type of superhero. Because I mean, Jesus, how many Captain Marvels did this guy write? But these,
oh my God. And Supergirl and Legion of Superhero stuff too.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I before he passed, and now all of a sudden I'm blanking who wrote the great Otto Binder biography. Great.
Yes.
Shame on us.
Yes, indeed. I have his books right here somewhere, but I can't remember his name, so I can't.
He also wrote the Kurtzman biography.
Yes.
Damn it! I know. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Paul. I keep wanting to call you Marty.
Exactly who you mean. I have, like I say, I have several.
Yeah.
And if I knew
maybe someone in the comments will help us out.
Yeah,
but that's funny. Mr. Deere says the digest accelerated my nearsightedness. I remember I want to say either the late 70s or early 80s, a Legion of Superheroes paperback that reprinted some great Legion stories from the 60s or 70s. So
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Yeah, and then William Shelley was who we were trying to think of.
Bill Shelley. That's
Bill Shelley. Bill Shelley. Absolutely.
He also wrote a really good Kubert biography, and
yes, he did.
Yeah, good.
And Marty. Well, first of all, Marty wrote one of those prose Marvel novels. I think it was Iron Man.
No, Marty wrote a short story, Daredevil short story in one of those Marvel novel series from 79 and 80.
Yes.
It all came out in 79, I think. One a month.
Okay.
Because I wrote two of them. I wrote number 8 and number 11, the last one. And Marty had a short story under the name Kyle Christopher, a Daredevil story.
Oh, wow.
And it was a really good story. I mean, Marty was the first person. He's the first person to do Daredevil in prose, I guess. So he thought about how Matt would see things, and he described things from Matt's point of view, and he handled it brilliantly. And it was just like, God damn it, that's good. I mean, Marty was like a year older than me, and he broke into the business a few years ahead of me. And I always felt he was at least 5 or 6 years ahead of me on the writing scale. When I was first breaking in, he had a handful of stories under his belt, but I was sitting there, lapping up his advice, because he would, I helped him do some, breakdowns on stories. That Joker number 10, that unpublished last issue that just came out in a trade, I guess. I helped him break that down. He even gave me credit on that one.
Oh, that's great, man. Sure.
But, and then years later, we're working together again at DC, of course, which was, which is a pleasure. I got to spend every day with Marty. I could go hang out and, just spend a little time or have lunch with Marty. When I was in licensed publishing, I kept going to him going, hey, I got this book or this project or this short story collection or this whatever. I go, you want to do it? And he goes, no, I don't write prose. I write, screenplays and comics. Right?
Yeah, he's doing TV and then screenplays. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I go, no, but you'd be good. I go, you did a Daredevil story. You should do some more. No, I don't have time for that. Finally, like the 5th or 6th time I went up to him, I said, Marty, I got this prose thing. Why are you always hocking me about the prose? Why do you always want me to? I go, because you did it so damn good. I want to read more of it. That was it. I was bugging him for purely selfish reasons.
As a fan, I so get it. Honestly, Paul, I was the same way. And just as you felt he was a little further along on the writer experience chain, when I initially would talk to him and stuff, he's like, why are you talking to me, man? You should be talking to Carrie Bates and Elliot Magan and Denny and stuff. And I'm like, Marty, you created and I just went off on all these like villains that he created for Superman, and I'm like, you were the regular Superman writer for a nice run, and of course everything you've done, and thank God I kind of got him, and I don't know, Paul. It seemed to me that he wasn't going to conventions until the last couple of years of his life.
Right.
That he hadn't gone for a long time.
Right.
I remember meeting him in New York, like in 2006. It was when poor Steve Gerber, around there, when Steve Gerber had passed away. Yeah. And I know he was at that New York con, and I talked to him then. But like, I got him to go to a convention in Salt Lake City, the Fan X show there, and also Tony Moore was doing a Cincinnati con called Cincy Comic Con, not to be confused with the still ongoing Cincinnati con. And it was so great because not only fans, but so many pros went up to him that are around my age or slightly younger and would just say, "Oh man, Marty Pasco, it's so nice to meet you. You know, you're such an impact." And he's like, "I had no idea." And I'm like, it reminded me of when I heard about Jim Aparo finally going to San Diego and the love that he felt there. And he burst into tears because he didn't know. He didn't know that he, had all these people that were loving his work for decades.
I saw Aparo at a Chicago convention in the 80s. I don't know if I thought it was his first one, thought it was his first one. But it may not have been. But anyway, I went up to him. I've never met him before at this point. This is back in the 80s. And I introduced myself and I said, as a matter of fact, you did one of my, and he goes, yes, the Lois Lane story in Brave and Bold. I really enjoyed that one. How the hell? This was 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Why would you remember that one, that one story I did? But he was such a sweetheart. And years later, I got to work with him. As an editor on projects in DC Special Projects Department. And man, they didn't come more professional than that. He was just so. Jack Harris says that when he worked for Murray Boltinoff, when Jim was doing, the Bob Haney era of Brave and Bold, on Batman's guy, and Aparo, the rule was Aparo did 1 page a day, so he could do whatever it was. It's 20 pages or 25 pages a month or whatever it was. It was 30 pages a month. So so if it was a month of 31 days, Murray would say, give him an extra cover. And if you needed an extra page otherwise, forget it. It wasn't available. But he was a machine. He just and Jesus, again, love for Neil all over the place. But my absolute favorite Batman is that Bob Haney, Jim Aparo era.
So with you. When Wildcat would be Batman's sidekick on a lot of those Brave and Bold issues.
Yeah.
Among the other guest stars that would show up. But yeah, man, no, I'm so with you. And also, before I forget, I want to acknowledge, and again, available at Paul's website, that as we talked about prose books that had, the DC Universe heroes and stuff, I'm so glad a year or two ago you released Ragnarok, your JSA story, and that's an excellent Justice Society story, something that we have been waiting for DC to really pounce back on the classic, Justice Society. And if you miss them, Paul's got you covered with Ragnarok. So go to his website and pick that up along with all the other. What was your prose book about the 50s period of comics? Same Old Story?
Oh, the Same Old Story. Yes, the novel.
Yes.
A detective novel set in the early 50s about a former crime pulp writer who turns to comic books when the pulps go belly up. And he used to write pulp stories about his father, a well-known New York police detective. And the novel is, the murder victim is based on Bob Kanigher because everybody loved Bob Kanigher. And great. But anyway, he was such a character, though. I couldn't help myself. And but the story is told with this guy, seeing, living the real story, and then it's interspaced with the pulp fiction version story of the story featuring his father, the detective. So it's kind of a story told in two ways. Both, it's a Rashomon, with one side being fictional. So
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Ragnarok. I also love your books about, again, your writing process as well, and just your own stories. It's all waiting for you at paulkupperberg.com, and also Direct Currents, which is a nice precursor to the current book that is coming out early next year, and that is Direct Conversations. Everyone should go to the Kickstarter campaign and support this great book. There's the lineup of the people that Paul speaks to. And seriously, man, once you told me this is what you were doing, I was so excited to have you back and talk about this book. I'm really looking forward to it. And when it does hit the atmosphere and we can talk more about it, come back in a couple months and we'll do it again. Also, we've talked in principle about you and a couple of your other Crazy Eight collaborators. It's a great collection of writers that are doing great fiction, and I've talked to them individually. People like Bob Greenberger and also Michael Jan Friedman and everything. And I'd love to talk to more of them. So if you want to do a group conversation with the Crazy Eight guys,
we actually discussed that at the last meeting.
Oh, that's great, man! I'm glad to hear it. So, Paul, I'm a fan and I'm a friend, and I know you feel that way, and I'm so glad you do. And as I always tell you, whenever you got something new, please come back and we'll talk more about it.
And I appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Absolutely. Let me see if there's a final question or comment here. All right. Bob Rozakis was on that cover of Direct Conversations. I loved his blurbs in the DC Comics in the 70s series. Absolutely. That's the answer, man. Yep. So, yeah. And Michael says also, thanks. He loves your work, and agreed.
Thank you.
Also, hey, everybody, Paul's collection of Peacekeeper stories was collected, to coincide with the release of the Suicide. What's that?
My Peacemaker miniseries was not collected.
Oh, well, but you're in that Peacemaker.
Oh yeah,
collection.
Yes. There's the Vigilante stories.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, yes.
The miniseries, the 4-issue miniseries itself, I think may be a little too politically incorrect for today's delicate sensibilities, with Middle Eastern terrorists and Dr. Sin as the villain. So.
Of course. No, I can appreciate that. All right, that's fair. But also, my God, that Vigilante story, it's taken much more seriously than the Cena TV show or what you get in the Suicide Squad, but it's cut from the same cloth.
My take, well, the Vigilante issues were played a lot straighter and a lot crazier. For the Peacemaker miniseries, I deliberately went over the top. I wanted to make him, uber crazy, uber insane. Just, he was this guy who walks around thinking that the voice of his dead Nazi concentration camp, commander who's committed suicide in front of his eyes when he was 5 years old. He thinks that voice is still talking to him. So, they picked up that thing with the dead dad talking to him and haunting him. It's just, 30 years later, you can't do Nazis anymore.
Right.
That would make Christopher Smith about, 70 so, But, so, it's a different, it's different elements, but it's really the same dynamic. So I appreciate what James Gunn has done with that character. I think it's he is, and again as a kid you had Batman on TV, you had Superman, Peacemaker. I mean, what butt was that pulled out of to turn into a major character in a major motion picture and give his own TV series? I mean, this is indeed the golden age.
Well, certainly in terms of adaptation to film and television, it definitely is. We're only a week or so away from Black Adam, unless it's this Friday. I know it's coming up, the Black Adam movie.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to see that. I mean, not so much for Black Adder, but just for Hawkman and
Dr. Fate.
And Dr. Fate, yeah. It should be interesting. I'm also looking forward to seeing my girlfriend's granddaughter will be here this weekend, so I'm saving Super Pets for when she's here. But my Chip is in there, so I need to see it.
Oh, that's great, man! I forgot you created Chip. Wonderful.
Yes, although
that's excellent, man. I love Chip.
To have turned into an ordinary squirrel, but what the, as long as there's a royalty,
That's great, man. Everybody hit Paul's Kickstarter for Direct Conversations. Just under 2 weeks left, so let's get him not only to his goal, but let's tip him over as well. Not literally tip him over. Paul has good balance.
It's easy to do days, actually. Up the red meat, I don't know what's going on anymore. So,
just watch when you're near me next time. I might be pushing you over just because I'm a bully.
It's
so
noodles that it get. I don't know.
Dude, as always, I really appreciate the talk. And really, I'm so looking forward to reading the book and getting all these fantastic stories. So thanks for hanging out. And everybody else, thanks for hanging out. I'm going to record this Gary Conway conversation tomorrow, just audio, but expect that. And also, a quick little aside, I want to let everybody know I'm on my backup computer. My other computer is getting fixed. So the audio versions of these are a little slow. We've done several new conversations here on YouTube that aren't part of the audio feed yet. But I'm trying to also fill up the space on the audio side with some great Halloween-related interviews. I just reprinted my Mike Mignola talk. I've got a couple Svengulis that I'm sure I'll release before the October 31st. And actually, looking at old-time radio, my buddy Steve Darnall, who does a great old-time radio show, we talk about some of the classic old-time radio horror one-shots and also series from Lights Out to War of the Worlds and a lot of other stuff like that, that if you want to hear some great, you want your earbuds to really like get you into the mood of the Halloween season and stuff, you can find them at the Internet Archive, these episodes that we talk about. So check those out. But I swear, as soon as the other computer is up and running, I'll start posting new stuff, including this conversation with Paul. So thanks as always. Everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.